My name is Lilian Baeza Mendoza, and I am the chair of the Senate Faculty Committee on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And I welcome all of you to our second campus event taking place today. I would like to start by thanking both CTRL and the Faculty Senate for their support to this initiative, as well as all of our committee members that have put a lot of effort and thought into this event. With a special thanks to Elisa Margolin, who will be presenting and navigating through the discussion today. Also, my gratitude goes to all the panelists today that will share their experiences and their concerns and all their expertise to hopefully have a very robust conversation about this important issue today. So let me also point out that we're very much aware that some of the people that were interested in attending today, we won't be able to do so because there's an overlapping event on campus that is going on. We miss you, and we completely understand that sometimes a lot of meetings are taking place at the same time. And we will make sure that if you wanted to be part of this conversation today and you are not able to do so, you have access to the presentation, and we look forward to more conversations in the future. So thank you for the interest. So let me introduce you to Elisa. Professor Margolin is a professorial lecturer at the Department of Health Studies. She's also a member of the Senate Faculty Committee on Diversity and Inclusion since 2019, and is one of the faculty representatives for College of Arts and Science. She's passionate about issues of public health, and she's an advocate for wellness as an important part of our learning environment. So Elisa, whenever you're ready, thank you so much for doing this with us. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lillian, and thanks everybody for being here. I know that this is another moment to spend in front of a screen and on Zoom, and we really are grateful that you've made the time to do that. I'm particularly grateful to get to spend this time with our panelists today. We have a really amazing group of people who are going to share their work and their experiences, and I feel really honored to have the privilege to introduce them all and to share the space with you. So again, as Lillian explained, this is one in a series of campus dialogues that our Faculty Senate Committee on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion is hosting. And this one seems particularly important at this moment, you know, in the broader context and in this specific moment in time, a time when we're, you know, experiencing multiple concurrent crises of racial injustice that is compounding and being compounded by the other crises of health and economic injustice and climate injustice. And you know, that the moment of time in time, it feels like a really critical time for us to be also reflective and reflecting on how this impacts the environment in our classrooms, in our learning spaces, in our teaching spaces, in our community of educators. So welcome. I'm really excited to get started. Our first speaker is Sarah Weinstock. She's the Associate Director, the Center for Business Communications in Kogod School of Business. She comes to Kogod from Northern Virginia Community College, where she taught communications and theater for 8 years. She's taught at several other universities as well and lived around the world. Today, she's going to kickstart our conversation by sharing with us a document that she's recently created on inclusive language for instruction. And she shared with us earlier, these are tools that she hopes will help faculty in really knowing better to do better. So I welcome you and thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much. Yes, so you'll notice Lindsay was kind enough to place in the chat box an inclusive language PDF that I put together for our office, the Center for Business Communications, as a teaching tool and as a resource for faculty and staff to use. The foundation of everything that we do at American University has to be centered around education. And as my boss likes to remind me, many of the people that we interact with and work with on a daily basis were still in high school 6 months ago. And so we need to be cognizant that they haven't had the full share of life experience that maybe some of us have had. And sometimes mistakes are made that are not malicious, not willful, not intentional, just come from a place of truly not knowing, true ignorance. And so the more that we can shore that up with the students, I think it's always better for us to start from a shared place and a shared understanding. This document that we have put together is a living, breathing document. There's no way that a 5-page document can be completely exhaustive and could circumvent all possible manner of non-inclusive language, but when there is an omission that we feel is glaring and that we feel like needs to be addressed, then we absolutely amend the document to reflect it. What is posted in the chat is the very most recent, and it was amended just 2 weeks ago. We noticed that the section that we had on gender and sexuality mentioned sexual orientation, specifically choosing to call it sexual orientation and not sexual preference, but we didn't finally state why we were using that verbiage. And of course, during Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation hearings, that became a source of discussion, and we discussed it and realized maybe that is some knowledge that the students would benefit from knowing, why do we use one term and not another? In another example, we talk in the teaching document about race and nationality, and to make sure that we are accurately using terms whenever possible. I heard an interview the other day with Dr. Anthony Fauci, in which he stated that to turn the course of the coronavirus, Americans need to, and he stopped himself and went back and said, people who live in the United States need to X, Y, and Z. And of course, he's correct, right? It's not just Americans, but it was a great moment of someone recognizing in the moment that they were not being as inclusive, and in doing so, not completely accurate, and stopping themselves and rephrasing in a way that is more accurate and more inclusive. As Elisa said, when you know better, you do better. And that's really the idea behind this document and this teaching document. It shouldn't be used to shame people because everyone will make mistakes with language. Language is constantly evolving, and many of us can get stuck or mired in certain terms, certain euphemisms. They talk about the euphemism treadmill that keeps moving, and we should be progressing with that, but it's not to shame people who maybe aren't as cognizant of what the most recent terminology might be, but just to be able to have something to share so that hopefully we can all work from a place of common and shared understanding.
Thanks so much, Sarah. I wanted to just mention that as we go, we're going to hold questions until the end, and that's because we're going to turn off the recording for that part so that people can feel really free to speak and to share in whatever whatever way that they'd like to, whatever things that they'd like to bring up. And so I'll ask you to save questions for Sarah and the rest of our panelists until the end, when we can do that without the recording going, because I'm sure people have lots of questions for everybody. We're going to turn now to our next panelist, Robert Hoswald, who is an associate professor of finance at Kogod, and he's bringing to us a specific example, so sort of bringing Sarah's work here to life, a little bit, a specific example of a racially charged incident that he experienced with his students. Robert had a short career in investment banking before he turned to academia, and before coming to AU, he worked at the IMF at Indiana University in Bloomington, where he also studied violin as an undergraduate, and I understand violin is still a big part of his life. And he teaches on our campus mainly undergraduates in international finance, fixed income analysis, and management of financial institutions. So as I said, he's going to share with us a specific racially charged incident that he's recently experienced. Thank you so much for being with us.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for your kind introduction, Alyssa, Liliana. Thank you very much for having me. I would like to share with you an incident of incivility in the classroom. I hope you can see my presentation. You know, I teach in a business school, so if I don't have my PowerPoints, I feel intellectually naked and disempowered. So the incident happened in one of my senior classes. Majority of students take this class as seniors. So contrary to what Sarah explained to us, these are students who for the most time have already had internship or professional experience, have gone through Kogod's training in professional behavior. We have quite a lot of excellent support initiatives for them to make the transition from high school via college to work. In my classes, I do believe in group work. Students sign up for their teams in the first 2 weeks. But I had one student who somehow didn't join his friend's group. And instead of contacting me, Professor, what can we do? Just starts to rearrange his group and the group that he wanted to join. So in the process, he switched around a total of 10 bewildered students, including himself, to the surprise of the 2 TAs and myself. It was a large class, causing administrative chaos. I became aware of that when other students just said, Professor, what's going on? Can he do that? And normally students are not supposed to do that. But on the other hand, they're consenting adults. So I emailed to everybody and said, well, let's see how this is going. Please be patient. Let's try to accommodate the student who wants to join his friends. But after that, there was general unhappiness. So I pointed out to the student, enough is enough. And then he writes an explanatory email in which he objects to one student in particular in his group, very pleasant Asian student, writing, I will not be in a group with beep boy. And I was totally taken aback by that. General consternation. The insulted party is an Asian student from Vietnam. There was a large group of Vietnamese students in my class. The perpetrator, Caucasian, somewhat abrasive, but also a decent student. So not sure what was going on here. Before I could even do anything, think of it within half an hour of the insulting email being sent, the insulted student very firmly puts the perpetrator into his place, writing essentially, suit yourself in terms of group composition, but please, let's keep the exchange professional and to the point, adhere to commonly shared social conventions. And by the way, my name is so-and-so and not Beep Boy. Fortunately, I was CC'd both on the insulting email and the reply, and I was already drafting an excuse when the insulted student's reply came through to my Outlook. So I saw the exchange immediately. I apologized in the name of COVID and American University for the deplorable lapse of professional courtesy and unacceptable behavior. Took that opportunity to point out that there's certain language which you might find funny, but we don't, and reminded students of our standards, how to uphold them, and what AU expects of them. However, I was so troubled that later that afternoon and evening, I wrote an email to the dean's office at Kogod and asked essentially, do we have a policy how to deal with that? But they didn't even get back to me for 2 weeks, although the senior associate dean and I are friendly, and he often comes to drink espresso and used to come to drink espresso in better times with us. I have to assume they were just swamped. I also contacted the Dean of Student Affairs, asking for action, asked around who to contact, followed up with a particular person. Absolutely no reaction, nothing whatsoever, not even an acknowledgement that I had written to them. The next 2 weeks, the class became restless. There were so many students involved, word immediately got out, and the students talked a little bit to me, but mostly the TAs who were really troubled about it. But fortunately for everybody involved, said all the right things, came to me and said, Professor, you have to address this issue. I asked them, what does the class want? They said, well, everybody tells us, why is this unpleasant student? Most of the students apparently used a very different word still in our class. I then received an email from the insulting party that claimed that I had publicly labeled him a racist, which I had carefully avoided in my apology. I didn't say anything about the incident per se. I just pointed out that we have certain standards and there's professional courtesy you need to adhere to. He threatened twice legal action, first in an email, which I think is very stupid, but he also came to my office, essentially yelled, raved, and ranted, a little bit unhinged by the time, and insisted that I retract my apologize and write an apology to him with CC to the whole class. I also went to see Mary Clark when I didn't hear back from Student Affairs. It was a little bit hard to convey the issue to her. We seemed to be set up for incivility and aggression, microaggression between faculty and students and faculty and staff, but not for student-on-student incidents. And she agreed with me that incivility between students is not a foreseen contingency, but after the second talk, she realized it was kind of serious and managed to involve Student Affairs, who finally got back to me. And so by now we are about 6 weeks later, and after 2 months, so it was at the beginning of term, early September, we're talking now early November, the resolution was that the student simply mistyped the name of his classmate. No further action is required. I was asked to apologize to the student for the inconvenience, which I found a little bit thick. It's true that 4 letters of the insulted party's name are in the slur too, but you need to add letters and rearrange the first name and whatever. So to me, it's a little bit the problem of a well-heeled student and well-heeled parents. I think that we chickened out in the face of a potential issue of legal liability. I was told I couldn't exclude the student from the class, and when they asked me what I wanted to do, and they told me I had to make it work. So my lesson from this is that on the one hand, the administration, the community expects faculty to take action, but we're then abandoned and left to our own devices. It's a common issue that I noticed in many academic settings, that we don't have real authority, but at the same time are being asked to assert it. Student affairs, very strangely, were reluctant to get involved. The only explanation I have is that this is the charm of a quiet life. They sat on the issue for months without getting back to me or taking any action, and chose the path of least resistance when forced to act by Mary Clark. To me, that's the absolute worst outcome. Faculty in this type of situation face all the consequences. There was a lot of ill will from the class and the teaching unit, serious displeasure voiced with the incident, and to a lesser degree with myself privately. The legal threats from the perpetrator were hilarious, because he essentially told me I must have better legal insurance than you. Little did he know that I subscribed to this ancient ERIC legal insurance benefit that AU used to offer when I joined a long time ago. And I didn't like the high-handed indignation from student affairs as well when I talked to them on the phone several times, but it also transpired in the emails. Our hands are bound. So there are two possible lessons and takeaways. Which path would you choose? Ignore such incidents and hope for the best? I think it's unlikely that the best will happen. It's unethical to ignore them. Or take action and face the music from students, parents, and our own administration for overstepping authority. But then you're on your own, and there isn't that much you can do. So to me, maybe we should strengthen the code of student conduct and include incivility among students more explicitly. And then, of course, the administration has to enforce it and back us up. And with that, I thank you for your attention, and would love to hear from you what you think.
Thank you so much, Robert. Again, I think we'll hold off on questions and discussion until the very end, but I'm sure that there are many questions that will be coming in. So we'll be patient for just a few more moments, because we have two more really wonderful panelists to share with us. So next, it's my pleasure to introduce Meredith Burnett, who's a professorial lecturer in the Kogod School of Business. She also chairs the Diversity and Inclusion Committee there. Dr. Burnett's research and teaching interests are in the areas of organizational behavior and human resource management. And her research examines how individual differences, including disabilities, and human resource policies interact to influence employee behavior. She's particularly interested in examining how these factors influence outcomes like employee retention and employee knowledge sharing. So today she's here to share with us research that she has been very recently collecting, and it's specifically research to better understand the threats to safety and prompt calls for safe spaces by analyzing some ways in which people describe the experience of not feeling safe. So specifically, she'll focus today on how the priming of subordinated social identity group status may influence meaning making about threats to safety. Meredith, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Alyssa, for having me. And thank you both to Sarah and Robert. I'm going to do something that's similar to what they've just done, but from a research perspective. But first I wanted to acknowledge Holly Ferrara, my co-author and friend, and I have been working on this study for a few years. And as you probably would imagine, it's been through several iterations, but I think where we are now is great for this particular audience. And so we started out a couple of years ago, and we were actually looking at a broader theoretical model, which looked at how participants make meaning of situations where they feel unsafe, either at work or in the classroom, through different experiences that they have, where their identity or a context which was supposed to be safe is actually compromised. And our broader theoretical perspective looks at how those unsafe situations actually lead to norm violations and uncertainty in their environments, which is in many cases internships or summer work experience, or even in the classroom. And we were also looking at how those individuals responded to those unsafe perceptions, and then ultimately how it impacted their performance changes. So that is the broader theoretical perspective that we're looking at across several studies that use students at a Mid-Atlantic university as participants. And so here, for this particular group, I thought it would be nice to focus on how language actually creates a sense of threat or vulnerability, which makes it actually difficult for students to learn in their classrooms. And then also, and related to that same issue, is to look at how their experience of identity threats actually create emotional responses in the form of anger, fear, discomfort. And then also we're looking at some of their self-protected responses that they use as a result. And that includes withdrawal behaviors or being silenced in the classroom as a result of some of the things that they experience. In terms of the model for what I just shared a few moments ago, it would look like something that is shown on the screen. If we were testing this, which we are, basically, again, looking at the cues or the situations which make those students feel unsafe, their perceptions of why it made them feel unsafe. Were they singled out? Did they feel vulnerable? Did someone question their social identity? Did they feel that their social identity was threatened? And then what was the emotional response? Their anger, their discomfort, their fear. Did they feel tired or nervous or anxious? And then, of course, ultimately how they responded as a result to those feelings. Lack of motivation is something that we are seeing when they are working and these types of things happen. Sometimes they will respond that they intend not to return the following summer, or they'll stay at their desk all summer. Sometimes they do, in fact, stand up to the situation or ask for help. So we had a sample, our initial sample consisted of 69 undergraduate students, and it was qualitative in nature. So we had them respond using written narratives, which we iteratively reviewed and noted what they were saying and came up with a model that you saw on the previous page. There were 69 undergraduate students, but we are well beyond that number now. Their average age was between 20 and 22 years old. Most of them indicated that the US was their country of citizenship. And then also 40% of our sample was female. Importantly, I wanted to point out that no more than 3% of the sample was from a country other than the US. So the majority of them indeed were from this country. And so, as I mentioned, it was a qualitative study, but rather than dig deep into what we were actually doing and what we're going to do with this data, I thought it would be nice for this particular group to share some of the narratives that students wrote. I'm not going to share all of them with you, but I have selected a few that I think might be good for our discussion. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to peruse these, and then at the end, I'll open it up to questions. Thank you.
Meredith, thank you so much. Those were really powerful, thought-provoking insights. I'm so grateful for you having shared them with us. I think, again, just to protect the confidentiality of everyone, we'll save the questions to the end when we can turn off the recording. But I hope that we will return to many of those, because it's such a rich place from which to deepen our discussion. I want to turn to our final panelist now, Consuelo Greer, who serves as the Director of Multicultural Student Support and the co-director for the Center for Diversity and Inclusion at AU. And we saved her for last in hopes that she's offering us some way forward and some solutions. So she provides thought partnership on issues of equity, access, and support across the university, as well as in the greater DMV area, for both K through 12 and post-secondary education. She describes herself as both a mother and a lifelong learner, and therefore her commitment to infusing equity and inclusion in all areas of leadership has spurred her interest and passion for working across the education spectrum. As a researcher, her focus has been on transformational leadership with a lens on the experiences of Black and Latino, Latinx leaders. So today, in this space of where do we go from here, she's recently developed a tool for interrupting aggressions. And she'll be speaking with us about really what we can do when these types of racially charged events occur online or in a classroom, some of the tools and the resources that are available, how we can think about responding from the lens of offender or the receiving end or a faculty member. So Consuelo, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate the warm introduction and all that was shared in terms of resources, experiences, and research from our colleagues here. So again, thank you for that. I think Meredith's research and the words from students themselves is always a hard act to follow because they are the reason why we are here. So when they are harmed, it means that someone has slept on the job. And I think that that is a hard pill to swallow for all of us because, again, it is not about our intention. It is absolutely about the impact. So I believe the tool, and I would love to take credit for it, but it is my amazing team in CDI, which is inclusive of Michelle Strange, who may or may not be on here, who's one of our associate directors, and also one of our student staff that came up with this really wonderful tool, which I will delve into just a little bit more as I get to the end there. But if you've opened it up already, you'll notice that it says tools for interrupting aggressions with micro scratched through. And part of this is about the intentionality of language. I think we say microaggressions because it makes them seem small. It makes them seem less harmful, but they're not. They are aggressions. And when you're on the receiving end of it, they don't feel small. They feel very aggressive. And I think as we're talking about that today, an important thing that I want to lead with is to think about some of the things that you can do as faculty, as staff, and others who are responsible for environments when something happens, not if something happens. Because as we see by the many examples that have been shared just today, things happen. And when you find yourself ill-prepared or unprepared entirely to be able to address them, you're trying to figure it out on the spot. And given all of the training and all of the education all of us have gone through, we leave very little to chance when we're talking about subject matter. However, when we're talking about how to address these issues in the course of a class or an event or a program, often this is left to chance, and that's just not good enough. Two really key things is thinking about what to do in the moment and what to do afterwards, because it doesn't stop. The harm is often felt much after the event has happened, much after the Zoom room is closed, much after people have walked out of a classroom. So it's important to think about taking a moment and stopping, acknowledging that something has happened in the moment, that there has been harm done, and then thinking about how do you chart a path forward as a community. And when you're in the classroom is the community, right? It is a sub-community of the larger AU community. Take responsibility. Even if you were not the one who offended, even if you were not the aggressor in a situation, which we hope is not the case. One of the things that I heard another faculty member do after an incident was brought to their attention was an apology. And it was so sincere, and it was very short, but it was so impactful for the students. And they said, I am sorry that that happened in a space that I was responsible for. That was huge because they weren't the person who offended. They were not the person who, said the thing that triggered everyone, but they were the person who was responsible. And in a power dynamic, they were at the top in that moment. And that to me was modeling both for the students and for other faculty, how you take responsibility for something because you are in charge of the space. Recognize that there's more than one need in that moment. We bring multiple identities into spaces, and when you're teaching students, you have multiple identities, multiple lived experiences that are in that space. That means there's going to be multiple needs that have to be addressed when harm is done. particularly in a racially charged incident. Students who feel most closely given their own personal identities to whatever the racial incident was are going to feel harm in a very different way than their peers feel. So much in the way that you learn and you think about how to differentiate instruction for different learning styles, you also have to think about how do you differentiate care when there is harm that is done within a community. And that can be really challenging, but taking that moment to pause is really helpful in that moment, and being cognizant of who is in the room and how do I now shift to be able to support the multiple identities, the multiple bodies, and all that is there in that space. I'll give an example. There was a racially charged incident in a class recently, and the faculty member did reach out to our team to provide some additional support. Unfortunately, the N word was used in the class, and the Black students felt harm in a very different way than their peers felt. Everyone was triggered, everyone felt harm, but the harm felt as a Black student when that word is used is very different than the harm felt as a white identifying student or as a Latino student in that space. And so the acknowledgement that everybody had to proceed forward at the same space, at the same pace, and also being expected to learn at the same rate for the rest of that class and that week was really unrealistic. And the students were not immediately vocal about it, but as they sat with it, they really were like, you know, this isn't right. And so thinking about how can you change that up a little bit, and how can you really make space for everyone? Don't expect to proceed as business as usual. I think that's difficult, and that's a lesson for all of us in this moment. I mean, we're living in multiple pandemics right now that are colliding at a rate that none of us were prepared for. But to proceed as business as usual, as if we're not experiencing trauma, is not a trauma-informed response. And it also continues to do harm when we're expected to continue to move forward as if we have not been harmed. So thinking about that, and sometimes that's really challenging, particularly in a classroom where you have a finite amount of time and you're trying to think, how do I get all of this information across? And now we've been interrupted, and now I have to do this. And now how am I going to make sure that they still get everything that they need and they're not behind the other courses? So it's not easy, and I won't pretend that it is. But moving forward with business as usual means that you're still leaving people behind. You have proceeded, but the students are probably still stuck in the moment that harm was done. So trying to move forward and retain information when you're like, did this thing really happen? Is everybody really ignoring this thing that happened? Are we really not going to talk about it? Is no one coming to my rescue? And I think that's some of what you saw in the quotes that Meredith showed. That it was like, not only did this thing happen, but nobody came to my rescue. And at 18, 19, 21, 22, you don't really know how to do that yet. So that's where we have to step in and figure out how we do some of this. You know, I think the tool has been shared there. And one of the other things that Meredith talked a little bit about was the emotional response. And I think, you know, sitting with that just a little bit to think about the myriad of emotional responses that can happen when there's a racially charged incident or some other harm that takes place in a class, and that anger, that fear, that quiet, the anxiety, being tired, turning off their cameras. I just talked to a student today who was talking to me about their graduate course, and they felt gaslighted for, 30 minutes of the course. And then he said, you know what? He said, I turned off my camera. I was like, I can't learn from this person anymore because their only intent is to gaslight me in this moment. And I'm only in this class with 3 other Black students. So in that moment, not only has the student been harmed, but their learning has been interrupted. And I think remembering that to figure out, how do we pivot? How do we interrupt these aggressions? Another issue that takes place in classes when we don't address harm, when we don't take a pause to figure out, to naming it, figuring out how to chart a path forward and what will come next, is that students are left wondering who their peers are. This is also another distraction, and this is also another way that we deviate from their learning and disrupt their learning. So in one of the classes where there was a racially charged incident, students were left wondering if one of their classmates was the perpetrator. This particular incident was a Zoom bombing incident. So there was some veil of anonymity behind it because there was a pseudonym used. You couldn't see a face, so they don't know exactly who it was. But in a debrief session with students, one of the students said, I'm left wondering, did one of my classmates perpetrate this? Did they either do it or did they have one of their friends come in? And we have group work coming up. And if this is their view, I don't know how they're going to work with me. I don't know if they're going to try to sabotage me in class. So it also continues to leave these lingering questions. And the faculty member would not have otherwise been informed of that. I don't think most of us were thinking, wow, that's some of the lasting implications of this type of an incident. But because they made space to say, you know what, we can't proceed with business as usual this next class. We're going to have to figure out how to rework the remaining items within the syllabus because we've got to take a pause here. We have to restore community here. And we just wouldn't have known that some of these feelings were the feelings that our students were sitting with had we not taken that moment to really talk with them. What to do afterwards? That is the hard part. And again, it gets back to there's not enough time. None of us have enough time. There's never enough time in class. There's so much more you want your students to know, but figuring out how do I rework this? Is it possible to move one of the assignments? Is it possible to provide a recording instead of maybe some synchronous learning while we're right now in the virtual environment? What are some other ways that I can get students this information so that I can really make sure we do the care that is needed so that they can learn as much as possible for the remaining of the semester or the remaining of our time together, whatever it is that might be. Getting support. I think it's no one is expecting that you will know how to do everything right, but do what you can in that moment and seek out the appropriate resources. CTRL is fantastic. My office does a lot of consulting with others, and there's a number of faculty around who have really, really solid expertise in these areas and will provide some guidance with how do you move forward. But take that moment, do the outreach and say, you know what, I don't know what to do. I know I need to do something, but I don't know what right now. Figuring out how to do that and reinforcing community expectations. It is important to name that something happened and that it is in direct violation of the expectations within your course. This resets the tone for students that you're not condoning it. Because when you don't say anything, they have lingering questions about, is this also something you agree with? Are you also condoning this? Why, if I'm looking to you as the power figure here, how come you haven't come to my aid? So I don't want to take up too much more time because I want to make sure that we have enough time for questions or that we can respond. And I'm happy to either show these, but if everybody has the resources, I think a better use of our time might actually be to just have discussion and open up to questions. So I will turn it back to Elisa, and I'm around and happy to continue to weigh in here. Thank you.
Zilla, thank you so much. This, as I started this saying, I'm really honored to be with all of you. I'm learning so much. It's such important work that you're all bringing to us. So thank you, everyone, for sharing. I think at this point, I would love to just open it up for questions and a dialogue.